Welcome to the Bookman's Corner. I'm your host, Lois Lindstrom. We're excited to welcome back to our show author Dean King. Dean, welcome and loved your book.
Great to be here, Lois.
Great to have you. Which is an enthralling narrative that recounts the experiences of 12 American sailors who were shipwrecked off the coast of Africa in 1815. They were captured by desert nomads, sold into slavery, and had a hellish 2-month journey through the Great Saharan Desert. Dean King is an award-winning author of 10 nonfiction books and has appeared on National Public Radio, ABC World News Tonight, and BBC Radio, among many others. While writing this featured book, Dean King crossed the Sahara on camels and in Land Rovers. And he is the chief narrator in 2 History Channel documentaries and is the producer of its nonfiction series, Hatfields and McCoys, White Lightning, which aired in 16 episodes in 2023. Dean, how did you discover the story and the ordeal that these sailors went through in 1815?
Well, I was in the library of the New York Yacht Club in New York City researching a book about Patrick O'Brian. I did companion books to his Aubrey Maturin novels. Mm-hmm. And one day I looked up on the shelf and I saw on the spine of an old leather book the words "Sufferings in Africa." And I thought, wow, that looks interesting. I pulled it down and cracked it open and started reading. And it was this sailor's memoir of being shipwrecked on the west coast of Africa and enslaved on the desert and what happened to the crew. I couldn't put it down. So I sat down in one of those old red leather chairs that they had in the library, and for 2 solid days I read this memoir and realized it was really a gem.
So Dean, what was the purpose of this ship going to Europe? What were they bringing from America and what were they hoping to get in ports in Europe?
Well, there's actually some debate about that, but during the War of 1812, the British had blockaded the American coast, and a lot of salt came out of the West Indies, which the British also controlled.
Okay.
So there was a lack of salt. They were going to go down to New Orleans to pick up tobacco and take it over to Europe, trade the tobacco for Spanish coin and wine, and then they were going to pick up salt in the Canary Islands and bring it back. Some people claim that they might have been going to pick up slaves as well, but I don't think that's accurate.
Okay. That was my next question. Was there any mention of slave trade by Captain Riley of the Commerce? Because we know that slave trade was prohibited in Connecticut in 1790, and that Americans were not supposed to bring slaves into the country from Africa as of 1808. And now we're talking 1815. So what do you think about that?
Right. Some conspiracy theorists think that maybe they were going to get slaves because the Canary Islands were a slave trading area right off the west coast of Africa. So it was also a place where you could get salt. But I base my feelings about it on the descriptions of what was on the beach after they wrecked. And they didn't have the tools of the slave trade that apparently that were in the shipwreck.
Okay. Well, I was amazed to read that the Commerce ship ran aground in dense fog off the west coast of Africa, about 800 miles south of the Canary Islands. How were they saved from dying at sea?
Well, that part of Africa, the coast, it's the Sahara Desert. And in places, the Sahara comes right to the edge of the water and drops off. And the sailors were all pretty scared of it. On maps, a lot of times it'll say wild Arabs or something, unexplored. And so when they wrecked in that fog, they really didn't want to go to land, even though they were near the land. They decided that they'd be better off going out in the ship's boats and trying to find a passing ship. But these waters are not very highly traveled, so that they tried that. They went out as the waves were crashing over the ship. It was a harrowing scene.
And the ship was filling up with water, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
And sinking, right?
Yeah, so they had to swim down and get some barrels out of some provisions and some wine to take with them.
And they had to get into long ships from the big ship, right?
Exactly. Yes.
And then go to shore.
Well, they didn't go to shore. They went out. They went out into the sea trying to flag down a passing
Right.
ship.
But that was the first thing they did. Yeah.
Yeah, but then the sun was beating down on them, and the salt water was tearing up their skin. They ran out of food. They ran out of water, and they were reduced to drinking their own urine. And so finally they decided, hey, maybe we should try to get to land.
Yes. What stands out in your mind as the most grueling problem that they had?
Oh gosh, so many. That initial time out in the boat was pretty rough, and reduced them almost to nothing. Once they got back to land, they were below these cliffs. It took them 3 days to get up the cliffs.
And they use ropes and picks and that kind of thing?
They used hands and boots. Yeah, they didn't have ropes and picks.
They didn't have any equipment with them.
They weren't prepared for that. You know,
Yeah.
that's not what they had planned to do. That was not on the agenda.
Poor guys.
Yeah, so they get to the top, and again, they don't have anything to drink. They've captured their own urine in bottles, and
They're dying of thirst, basically.
yeah, they're dying of thirst and starvation and exposure to the sun.
Yeah. Well, what's amazing to me is that you actually tried to retrace James Riley's journey yourself by going to Africa in 2002. Tell us about that journey. What was the most difficult aspect of trying to do this?
Well, it's a very remote place. So for one thing, I had to bring together a lot of logistics. But then right during the middle of all this, 9/11 happened. And I was supposed to go the week after 9/11. So I had people in Morocco who were helping me set up my journey, following in Riley's footsteps as best I could, with camels and Land Rovers to assist. And when 9/11 happened, some of the people that were coming with me to go to Africa couldn't go.
That's right, change their mind.
Yeah.
That's right. That's
so and I was going to postpone it, but when I called to the fixer who was helping me do all this, he said, "No, you've got to come. I have the camels in a truck. They're on their way down to your starting point."
Well, it's hard to fathom that the nomads in Africa in 1815 lived off camel milk and camel urine. I mean, did your research confirm this?
It did. The area is so remote and so little. There's so few resources there.
Yes.
That the camels are really the perfect beast for this place.
Yes.
They can eat the brush and
In
turn
the
it
desert,
into nutrition-rich milk, more nutritional than cow milk even.
Wow.
And when you were desperate, you would drink camel urine. It's sterile. It's not going to hurt you, and it's liquid. So that was important. They even use the camel urine for medicinal purposes.
My goodness.
And particularly, I learned over there when I asked my crew about it. They said, "Yeah, the urine of a pregnant camel is particularly considered good medicine."
Filled with nutrients, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, how was your experience astride a camel in 2002 and when you were in Africa? What was that like?
It was pretty brutal.
Was it brutal?
Yeah.
Was it hard on your rear end? Was it hard on your body?
It's hard on everything. You know, we had two really nice walking camels that were pretty good to ride on. Then we had some others that were brawny and more like pack camels, and those were brutal. I mean, you're either in front of, they're one hump camels, so you're either in front of the hump, and they have a donut of straw around there, which helps a little bit.
Is there a saddle? Did you have a saddle?
Yes, but it's
like a blanket or something.
It's a primitive kind of. It's got a metal bar, and sometimes it's digging into your thighs. If you're behind the hump, sometimes you're falling off the back because the trot is pretty bumpy. It was tough. I had trained for it because Riley said that they went 50 and 100-mile days across the desert.
Incredible.
Yeah.
On a camel.
On a camel, yeah. But he would get off, and they would have to run at times behind the camels because they were in so much pain. The flesh was stripped off their inner thighs and that sort of thing.
It's shocking to read this in the book, really. It's just that those sailors went through such an ordeal. Well, tell us how nomads treated illnesses by heating up a long blade the size of a Bowie knife. That was pretty amazing to read.
Yeah, at times when Riley wrote, I find, he's a sailor, a fisherman, so it's times I thought, well, maybe he's telling a bit of a tall tale here, even though overall I knew the narrative was true and accurate based on the details I was reading. But one of the things he talked about was that some of the sailors got sick and they called it moon sickness. And to treat this, the nomads heated up knives in the fire and then took the back of the blade and applied it to the necks of the six sailors.
Applied just to their neck, right?
Yeah.
And wouldn't that scorch the neck?
Well, it did. Yeah, it branded them, and the sailors were screaming and they were in pain. And as Riley describes this, it's really pretty horrific.
Primitive,
But when I got over there, and I was riding with one of my guides in the Land Rover, I noticed on his neck a scar that would be like a knife blade scar, and I asked him about it. He described the exact same thing, that they had heated up knives. He said he was about to die of an illness, and they heated up the knives, applied them to his neck, and it saved him. And so there I was confirming things that I didn't expect to confirm. I went over there to recreate this journey to identify the places that he described and the wells and various things. I didn't think the way of life that he described would still be there.
But it is.
But it is, yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Well, how does American James Riley compare to British T.E. Lawrence or Lawrence of Arabia? How do those two compare, you think?
Well, I think in ways they both fell in love with the desert.
They did.
They were there for different purposes in different places, but the desert is a special environment, and it's the kind of place that I think you have to surrender to survive.
Yes.
You have to try to understand it. And
there are not many people there, right? It's very open. It's real nature, isn't it?
Yeah, very, very open. And in places where I was, it hadn't rained in 6 years.
6 years?
Yeah, it hadn't rained anywhere in 3 years, and in places 6 years. And so where there were old riverbeds that came down to the river, some water had been left in there, and the dunes had closed them off, and the water was bright green with algae.
Oh my goodness!
And so it was very otherworldly. But I think I experienced some of what Riley experienced in that slowly you acclimate to the beauty of the desert.
Oh, yes.
And
the sunsets and the...
Yeah, one day in particular, we came into a valley and there were some nomads sitting on blankets having tea. And I thought, well, that's peculiar. Why are they out here in the middle of nowhere having tea? And I talked to the guide, and the guide said, well, they come from the town because they love the desert. They come out here to have tea like we would go to the park because they know it and love it.
Yes, that's right. It calms them down. Well, what protections did you and your team have in 2002 from the harsh Sahara in Western Africa that Riley and his team did not have in 1815?
Well, we had all the modern amenities. Sunscreen, yeah,
hats.
And yes, and hats, and we were covered. They were, when Riley and the crew got up onto the hilltop, they saw a fire, and they knew that they thought these people were cannibals, but they knew they were going to die. So they surrendered to this. They walked to the fire, and the nomads came racing out at them and had a fight. The big fight was over not between the sailors and the nomads. It was who was going to own the sailors.
Exactly.
But they fought over their clothes. They stripped them down. They were naked.
They were slaves, basically.
Yeah, but they were absolutely stripped of
everything,
and they were drinking out of the camel's troughs.
Wow.
About as much as you can be reduced as a human being.
Exactly.
So we had everything compared to that. We had tents. We had good food. We had guides.
Yes, you had medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Now, how did your research of Western Africa broaden your understanding of the institution of slavery? And it was interesting to read in your book that this American team of sailors, became the slaves of their captors. And how did your research of Western Africa broaden your understanding of the institution of slavery?
Yeah. Well, as I was sitting there reading Captain Riley's narrative in the New York Yacht Club library, that's what really kind of affected me the most, was seeing Americans enslaved abroad, white Americans, a totally different deal. And then I went down to the New York Public Library and I read that Abraham Lincoln had written in his 1860 campaign biography that Riley's narrative had an influence on his understanding of slavery.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so I was suddenly open to this incredible idea of what was this like for these people, and wanted to know more about it.
Yes, well, you've caught me. It was a fantastic read. And the other interesting character in your book is Sidi Hamet, a camel owner who resided north of Morocco, who is one of the most complex individuals in the skeletons of the Sahara. He helped the stranded American sailors. Why did he help them?
Yeah, well, Sidi Hamet was desperate himself. He had been, one of the amazing things about Riley's narrative is that at the end, he was able to get a translator and sit down with Sidi Hamet and interview this guy who had just taken him across the desert to ransom him, and get the whole backstory of the other characters. So to get that from this period is almost unheard of.
Yes.
So we have the whole story of Sidi Hamet. We know that he had been leading a caravan, that they'd gotten caught in a sandstorm, and that they had lost everything, and he owed money to his father-in-law, who had taken his family, his wife back, and his kids.
Right.
So we know that he was desperate. So Sidi Hamet, when he came into this village, this encampment of nomads who had Riley and his men, realized that they were valuable. They were white slaves that he could maybe buy down here and take up north and sell for more and make his money back to get his family back.
Right. Now, and he was Arab, right? Islamic.
Yes.
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 And so under the U.S. naval law, you wrote that James Riley was allowed to command the crew of the Commerce as a father would discipline his children. Did his authority over the men ever break down in your book?
Yeah, it did. Again, that scene towards the beginning of the book where they encounter the nomads for the first time, they're drinking out of the troughs, they're stripped naked. Riley realizes that things are changing here rapidly, because they've been fought over, and the nomads are separating with members of the crew. So as long as they had been together, part of the crew, he had been able to command that all through the hardships they had faced in the shipwreck on the boat.
Giving them a direction, what to do, where to go.
Yes,
That's right.
and it had given them heart and hope,
Right.
work functioning together as a team like that. But as he's going up away from the wells into the desert, and they're being separated, he has a moment of crisis, and he wishes he was dead.
Yes.
But then he realizes, no, I need to surrender to the will of God. I'm not in control anymore. And we all need to,
Yes. Well, that was what really caught me in reading this book, was how these men were always praying. The American sailors were praying. I was amazed at the depth of their religious beliefs, that they would eventually, that God was going to try to protect them. I mean, I was amazed that they hadn't given up.
Right.
They were strong Christians.
Yes,
Yeah.
they absolutely were, from the Northeast, sort of pilgrims.
Yes,
sturdiness.
They were very inspirational. Did the crew of that shipwrecked ship ever believe they would make it back home, do you think?
I think they had heart through a lot of it.
Through all the torture and all the difficulties, you felt they thought there was hope, right?
I'm sure there were moments of crisis like Riley faced, where you thought, how am I going to make it? I'll never make it. I can't endure this any longer.
Yeah.
But somehow, they were very tough men, used to the hardships of sea.
Right.
They had all that inside them. At times they were traveling together. There might have been two men together owned by a certain nomad and that sort of thing, and they would cross paths and see each other occasionally.
Yes.
Because they were, with the same group, but traveling apart because they have to forage more efficiently.
Sure. Now, the other thing I was wondering about is your title of the book, because the title is Skeletons on the Sahara. You Z, and that great desert in West Africa is named Sahara. So why did you start with a Z rather than an S?
Yeah, well, back at that time, there was no standardized spelling for the place. Yeah, and if you read Riley's original narrative, he calls it the Zahara, which is just too difficult to say. But other people at the time were calling it the Zahara.
Zahara.
Yeah,
okay.
so really those were the two main spellings. Zahara was, I think, more principal. So I like the fact that it takes us back to that time and makes us ask that question.
And that's how they call it. They call it Zahara, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was interesting to read about the African women from the various tribes around Morocco. How would you describe them?
Well, they're very tough and self-sufficient women. They were running the encampments a lot of times while the men were going out with the camels and or trading. They worked very hard, and they were very tough on the men.
But that's what shocked me, was that they did not have any compassion for these poor, starving, wounded sailors. They treated them terribly, I thought.
They were tough. Yeah, there's
Really
no doubt
tough.
about it.
Why
you
would
know,
why would you think it was because of the culture? I mean, they didn't want to be associated at all with white men, or do you think it was because they were just tough people, right?
I think there was probably a fear of that, being too closely associated or seen to being soft to the white slaves that were there. And,
really?
Yeah, and part of a very male-dominant society, that they wanted to, appear tough, and they're on guard and taking care of home.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was surprised by that part in reading that. And also, I was surprised to read that the horses were better treated than the American sailors by their captives. Why are horses so important?
Well, horses are very rare there.
Oh, I see.
Very, very unusual. It was, the camels are really how they measure their wealth. And camels are so well suited for the desert. When a sandstorm comes, they have eyelids that are very thin, they can see through. Their nostrils can be shut down, and they have moisture ducts that can keep, they can survive.
And they can go for so long without water. That was amazing, right? How long can they go?
It's incredible. They can go for days, weeks without water.
Without water.
They do store it in their hump, and if a camel hasn't had water in a long time, you'll see its hump is falling down.
Okay.
It just sort of
just goes
wags
flat.
over.
Yeah.
And then they produce that milk that the men can drink that's very nutritious.
Yes. And the other thing that struck me was why the brutality of the Africans over the captured American sailors was horrific. I mean, why were they so mean to them?
I think it's a combination of things. One is that they have so little that the baseline's starting very low. So when they don't feed them in and they don't give them enough to drink, all that, they don't really have anything to spare.
Oh, really? It wasn't being mean. They just didn't have anything to give,
That's
right?
part of it, but they're also pretty tough people, and they know that they need to get from one place to another. And if the men are not cooperating and aren't moving fast enough, they're going to pull their lash out and lash them. And there's also a pecking order. You have the Arabs, you also have black slaves, and you have white slaves, and so there's some animosity there about
who's going to get what, right?
Yeah, where they're going to sleep at night, all kinds of things, what duty they're going to have.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, what does your saga have a happy ending? Are the sailors rescued?
Well, some are and some are not.
Okay.
So I think that happy ending is one thing that I was able to do is that another sailor who was separated from Riley, named Archibald Robbins, had a different experience, and he wrote a book too. Nobody had ever taken the two books and compared their takes on what happened. So I was able to combine those two stories.
Great.
One thing you notice is that Riley had this incredible sort of spirit. He recognized that slavery was
horrible,
a bad institution,
yes,
and that it wasn't that these were bad people. Whereas Robbins was very bitter and angry at everybody who owned him and how they treated him.
Yes.
And it's very interesting to compare and contrast those
Two
attitudes
yes,
and what we can learn from those. And Riley ultimately, Sidi Hamet's going to carry him across the desert in this amazing journey up to Essaouira in Morocco, where he can be ransomed. And the two become friends. They respect one another because one's a sailor of the sea, one's a captain of the desert, and they aid each other even though they don't speak the same language.
And I think that Sidi Hamet was so impressed that the captain had a family back in the United States, that he wanted to get home to his family, and he cared about his family and his wife, and he was really that warmed his heart. I think he felt very,
because he was fighting for the same thing. They were both fighting for their families.
Yeah, they were fighting for their families. That's right.
So for me, the great message of this, the great lesson, the good thing that came out of this is this message of East and West bridging the gulf of their cultures. This is right after 9/11 that I'm over there, weeks after 9/11.
Wow.
And here we're looking at this historical story of two men, pretty desperate, on the desert who are able to overcome their differences.
That's right,
and cooperate.
That's right, and they were taking chances because they were trying to raise the money for their families. That was the message I got from it. That they were, they knew this was going to be a tough trip, but they were hoping it was going to pay off so they would have money for the wife and kids back home, right?
Exactly.
What did he do in his later years after he returned back to Connecticut? What did he do?
Well, interesting enough, he ended up going out to be a surveyor in Ohio, kind of a new territory. And the man who saved him, a British merchant in Essaouira, then it was called Mogador, was named William Wilshire. And Riley had to promise Sidney Hammett that he had somebody there who would pay for him when they got there.
Sure.
But he didn't. Yeah, it's on the coast. It was a colonial town in Morocco, Mogador, where the British merchants were. But he got a messenger to go up there as they're traveling, and this guy poses as his friend and puts the money up. So he and Riley bond, and there's now a place in Ohio called Wilshire, Ohio, named after this British merchant who saved his life.
Who saved his life. Yeah. Isn't that, what an incredible story. What an incredible story. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Bookman's Corner. Dean, I think that this would make a great film, and is there any chance that would happen? Or?
Well, Steven Spielberg had the option for a while, and Paula Weinstein, who produced A Perfect Storm, was on it, and so it's been optioned frequently.
Well, hopefully this show will create more interest and light the candle there. And I want you to tell our viewers where they can find your book to purchase it.
You should be able to find it at your local bookstore or at Amazon. It still has a robust activity in the book. I think it's got good word of mouth, and people keep reading it, which has been great.
Well, it's a wonderful book and so inspiring, and so our American sailors were so brave, and so I hope people will rush out and get it. And thank you so much for watching. Please join us again next month for a new edition of the Bookman's Corner. I'm Lois Lindstrom.